Hello and welcome back to the Stacey West YouTube channel. I'm back for another preview, back in league action this week after Monday's escape of a banana skin. And there was another side who escaped a little bit of a banana skin. Granted, in a lot more dramatic fashion than what Lincoln did on Monday night. And that was last Saturday against Weston-super-Mare, where Bristol Rovers, I believe, went to extra time to finally win 3-1, which was a little bit annoying because I had a bet on them to win in normal time. So thank you for that, guys. And to talk about Bristol Rovers, I am joined by a friendly face to the podcast, somebody who we had on last year, and it is Matt Iles. He used to do the Real EFL podcast with myself back when we were doing that last year, and now he just seems to be on a different radio show or highlights package or a TV channel each weekend doing commentary packages. Matt, how are we doing, mate?
I'm very well, thank you. Quite the introduction, Char. I think you've probably hyped me up a little bit there, mate. But no, thank you very much. I'm doing really, really well, mate. And yeah, our paths have certainly crossed before, so it's nice to sort of be reunited and be alongside an old acquaintance, shall we say? Anyway, but yeah, I'm very, very good, mate. Hope you're well, and everyone listening is as well.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very well, thank you, and I hope you are too. Thank you for coming on. It's always a pleasure to speak to people on these sorts of things. Do you know, like, little side note, with football and that is brilliant for that. Just getting a chance to kind of sit and have a conversation after not speaking for maybe a few months, but a game's coming up and that's it then. It's always a great chance to start taking the mick out of each other. And that's certainly what I think we might be doing.
Glad to probably want to speak to, mate, given last year's result, which I don't really want to talk about, but you probably have to bring up. So, yeah, crack on, mate, if you want.
Absolutely. Last year's result when you absolutely battered us, and yet we still managed to win 5-0 and you didn't even get to score a goal. But we certainly take them ones, don't we?
Let's not discuss that.
We do.
One,
you maybe less so. No, we'll move on. We'll move on. So I was going to say we'll move on to better things, but I feel like for you this might not be much of a better thing because we always start these previews saying how's the season going, but 17th in the league, bottom half of the table when it comes to goals scored, bottom half of the table when it comes to goals against. You've not got any kind of run of form at any point in the season. No consistency. Win-loss is your last 4 league games. Your top goal scorers on 3 goals. Mate, what's going on at Bristol Rovers at the moment? Is it really just as mediocre and as poor as what the table and the stats are suggesting?
I think that's probably fair. I think, I've not been to every game like some fans, so there's a lot more who can give a qualified opinion than myself, but I feel like I've certainly seen enough, whether it's been from a distance or actually inside stadiums to sort of give an opinion. It's been I think mediocre is the right word. I think when you look at the record we've had, it is very inconsistent. I think the sides that we've beaten, you exclude Charlton from the conversation, it's as you'd expect. You should be beating Northampton, Burton, Cambridge, and you should be beating, Shrewsbury out of the 5 you've won. In terms of the losses we've had, losing to Stockport, to Peterborough, to Barnsley, to name a few, is as expected, really. It's been, in terms of results, certainly probably as you'd expect as a Rovers fan. I think that's been as honest as it can get. In terms of performances, I think there's been a lot more concerning performances more than anything else. I think we've probably put our best display in, arguably, where we actually lost in our last league game, which was away to Reading, you could say. Maybe the second half against Burton, where we had to change things up after a pretty, by all accounts, poor first half. So, yeah, it's been a very disappointing campaign. I think there's a lot of fans who don't seem to like the head coach, not for off-the-field reasons like his predecessor, but for sort of his tactics and the way he kind of approaches things and what he wants to do with this team. So, yeah, it's been a pretty flat campaign so far, and in a weird sort of sense, as I've kind of touched on, pretty much kind of expected. But I think in some Rovers fans' eyes, we didn't certainly expect to be world beaters overnight. Probably myself, I did expect a little bit more, given that I think there's actually a pretty decent squad there.
No, absolutely. And I was certainly shocked myself when doing this prep, because, it's funny, isn't it? Although we sit here and we watch League One football week in, week out, you kind of this early on in the season still, I'm saying early, there's 13, 14 games been played, but it is still quite early on in the season. You start to forget and you start to lose track of where certain teams are in the division. So when I actually had to look up where Bristol Rovers were in the table to realise 17th, I knew it had been a poor and mediocre start, but I didn't realise that it was sort of quite that low and only on 16 points at the time, which, okay, yeah, it's not that bad, but it is 7 points off the playoffs now, and it's closer to the relegation zone at this stage, which is kind of never where you want to be. And it certainly shocked me as well. And you touched on something there. You touched on the management situation. And I want to just delve deeper into that for a moment, because I, again, follow lots of League One accounts on social media. In fact, I follow yourself, and I follow different Bristol Rovers sort of fans as well. And there's been quite a lot of talk over the past maybe month or so that the next game is El Sacchio, or whatever you want to call it, for the manager. And I'm just kind of thinking, is every game at the moment do or die for him? Is he really on the cusp of getting the boot?
I think, to be fair, I have thought that. I think when he had the horrendous run of when he'd lost 4 in a row, if you want to read into the reports, if you don't want to believe it, that's entirely up to you. But I do believe it. I think that if he'd lost that game against Charlton, I think what we're talking a good few weeks ago now, if he lost it, he would have been out the door, which I think is, in the grand scheme of things, probably right, given what had been going on. And, there's been a lot of investment in the team. We've broken our record transfer to sign Omachero, which will certainly probably touch on certain players in a minute. But, when you boil it down, there's been a lot of investment. The owner has backed his head coach who he brought in. He personally chose him to come in. Okay, it might have took some persuading, but, that there is that factor as well. I think with the management situation, every game he seems to win, it's more for his sake. It buys him more time. I think, kind of elaborating on your question, I think, sometimes people say it's a win that's good for the team, good for the club. I think it's, in this situation, really good for the manager, because I've not really known a Rovers manager be so, for me, universally disliked. And it sounds bonkers to say when you really bear in mind that we had sort of Joey Barton in charge, but I think there was a lot of Rovers fans who really stood by him, maybe not for footballing reasons, but for sort of his antics off the pitch, which I think, are probably quite wrong in the grand scheme of things. But in terms of the playing side of things, I think that's what's really let Taylor down. That's why the fans don't tend to like him. I think there's a style of play there that I think just doesn't really suit us. He wants us to be this defensive side. I mean, we started off okay. I think first 4 games we'd only conceded 2. We'd had 3 clean sheets, so it looked promising. Then since then we've only kept 1 clean sheet, so that really tells you to know. He's gone with a back 3 that I think he's tried to persist with. He likes it, as previous clubs will tell you. He's tried that system. It just doesn't seem to work for us, even though he's brought players in to try and fit that. And he's gone to a 4, and it's seemingly worked a lot better for us. We're more offensive. It brings the best out the squad. So I think he's been quite stubborn in changing things to some extent. So I think a lot of what he's done, he's not helped himself. So that's kind of that thing as to maybe why the fans don't like him. Gone a bit off tangent, but yeah, I think in relation to your question, and I did touch on it, I think it's more a case of every win he gets, it's big for him, not so much big for the team, because it kind of feels like it buys him a little bit more time, because I still stand by this, and if I'm proved wrong, I'm proved wrong, but I don't think that Taylor's going to last the season. But time will tell, because usually Rovers don't tend to act when things don't seem to go that well. But he's at the moment just seemingly trying to get his way through it. He's pulling results out somewhere. Charlton, he did it. Shrewsbury at home, he's beating the sides we should be beating, and losing to the sides we aren't expected to get anything from. So when you look at his record, yes, it's not great, but when you actually see Rovers week in, week out, you understand that, there's not a lot to necessarily like more than there is to like.
No, and exactly, that's going to kind of be an interesting one to kind of see for us this weekend as to how that's kind of going to go. And I do want to pick up on certain individual players, as again you sort of mentioned there. You're perfect. You're leading me right in the right direction. It's brilliant, man. So one of the players. Well, this is it. One of the players that I did particularly want to pick up on, funnily enough, is somebody you've already mentioned in Promise Omachero. Obviously, like you say, was it 550k that I believe.
I think it's been reported it's about 700 grand. I think, which is
it 700?
Money,
right?
Price tag, yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, obviously a big signing for you, a big sale as well for Fleetwood, wasn't it, at the time? But 13 games played, 12 starts, 2 goals, 3 assists. Like, what do you think about his output so far? Have you been happy with his performances overall? And is he going to be a danger to Lincoln this weekend?
I think he always has the potential to be a danger to any opposition. I don't think you can ever not take that away from him. I think he's come in with big expectations. I think Taylor's very much said that he's not the finished article yet. There's a lot to develop, which a lot of Rovers fans don't quite like, given he's our big record signing. He's got the number 9 shirt, so everyone's. I don't think the expectations are high on him as such, because I think they know he's a young player, he's raw, he's still got a lot to prove. But the kind of for him to come and say that when you spent that amount of money, I think is maybe not the wisest move to make, but that's a debate that's going to be for another day. But in terms of Omochera and the way he plays, I think the way he's played so far, we've not really used him right. I remember seeing him highlights at Fleetwood last year. He was an all-round type striker. He get the ball in his chest and he wants to play it back into midfield and run off it. And I don't think we've really given him those opportunities yet. We're almost expecting him to be the striker who gets the ball up and holds it and backs in and is really physical and just battles with his centre half. But I don't think that's his game. I think he wants the ball on the floor a little bit more. So he's running onto it. He goes in behind a little bit more. And, that's what I think really made him stand out at Fleetwood for me. So he's not quite been able to showcase his real attributes yet. And I think one thing about Omochera as well is that he's not had a great deal of service, and that's, I think he's been a real significant, person who's not really enjoyed the way we've played for large parts of this season, because we have been quite defensive. We have been quite rigid. We've been lacking that creative identity, that attacking identity as such. And he's probably been the biggest sufferer of it, really. So, as I've said, in the last 2 games, we've seen a slight emphasis change in terms of us going a bit more attacking. So hopefully he gets more chances. But at the moment, it does feel like that it's been, you'd probably have to say, probably a bit disappointing, but I think he's had a lot go against him, as I've mentioned. But for me, I think he's not a number 9 striker yet. I think he's more of a 9.5 or a number 10, because I think he wants to be that player who can create as much as score. I mean, he's got more assists than goals, which kind of tells you what it is at the moment. And maybe I think a lot of people perception of Omochera and what a lot of people thought he was brought in to do is now telling that it's not maybe as what people thought it was, that he was going to be this striker who's going to finish chances off, when actually he finishes them off and actually creates them himself. So he's been quite an interesting conundrum, I'd say, so far.
No, absolutely, which, like you say, certainly makes it an interesting one. It'll be interesting to see how he does go ahead and play at the weekend. And then there is another player who I did want to pick up on. It's a certain goalkeeper, Mr. Josh Griffiths. How has he been getting on for you guys?
I think he's done well. I think it was quite a bold move to bring him in. We had towards the end of last season Jed Ward in goal, and I think everybody really relates to a guy who's come from the academy. There's a big high hopes on him. There's I think in the near future we are going to see Jed Ward probably this time of the year. I might be on the Lincoln podcast talking about Jed Ward in goal, but I think Taylor made that decision. He wants Ward to continue his development. He wants someone to come in who's got a lot of experience under his belt. As you mentioned, Josh Griffiths has got time as a Lincoln player. He's played at Portsmouth, he's played at Cheltenham, so he's had a good EFL career. And I think when you've got Alex Palmer at West Brom, a guy that Lincoln will know really, really well, you're not going to start games. And I think as a West Brom second choice, you can't rely on starting in the cup, because you might go out in the first round, then you won't get a chance till January. So he's gone out, and I think he's been okay. I don't think he's done a lot wrong. I think he's up there as one of the best percentages-wise of making saves in the league, I think. If I remember seeing that the other day, or you hear people constantly saying. So when you break it down, I think he has been quite key. Certainly Rotherham at home, he got Rotherham away. He essentially got us a point in South Yorkshire, first away game of the season, which feels like a long time ago. So I think he's done okay. I think he's been exactly what I thought he would be. I don't think he's been spectacular. I don't think he's done anything wrong yet. So hopefully he kind of stays on the same trajectory he is, where he's been fairly good. And I think I certainly feel quite satisfied with him as a goalkeeper, and he's certainly done very, very well since he's been with us in a short time with us.
Well, no, that's good to hear, and he'll be again somebody who is very much welcomed back to the bank on Saturday. So absolutely, it'll be good to see somebody like him. So to kind of look ahead primarily into Saturday then? Because obviously what we've spoken about so far is more of a retrospective look on the season so far for you guys, but looking ahead towards Saturday. 2 questions. First of all, how are you kind of seeing you guys shape up, do we think, on Saturday? Who are maybe those key players to look out for? And then how do you see the game going overall?
See, I think in terms of how we'll set up, I think, as I mentioned, the Shrewsbury game and the Reading game, we essentially played with like a 4-2-3-1. And even against Western in the Cup. And there's a lot of our attacking play that there's a lot to really scratch your head about and really sort of think, that there's something not quite there. And, I've touched on it, so I won't go too much into it about how I think they're not quite being used right in an attacking sense. I think what Taylor does sometimes like to do, he likes to shape up against the opposition. Lincoln, religiously under Michael Scavala play with a back three. They're very much like a typical 3-5-2 sort of side, or 3-4-3, where the wing backs are very much up and down. They've got, typically 2 centre halves, or one that will go up, put the ball in, like a Sean Rowan if he plays there sometimes, because he can alternate. But I think we'll resort to going back to our 3. I think, and I don't think that's necessarily going to work. I think if we stick to what we know, or what we've done the last 2 games where we look like we're an attacking side, I think it's going to suit us, because I think when we tend to go up against sides who've fared better than us, take last season into this game, like into this context. But what Taylor tends to do is he's very standoffish, very respectful, and I think we need to be kind of going up and at teams a little bit, especially at home. I think there's not been too many real performances where you've been off your seat this season, and I think we can have the opportunity. Yes, you run the risk of Lincoln getting opportunities, but they're a very good football inside. And I think if we sit in and be defensive, it won't work. We tried it at Stockport, we tried it at Huddersfield, we tried it at Peterborough, and we were left with egg on our face, and we've had nothing to show for it. So we're at home. Yes, the crowd is, not quite as noisy as what it can be, but I think, that can change if you go from the outset wanting to win. Don't go it from the outset straight away, but if you show the appetite more than what we have, then there's every opportunity. So it's the big question for me is how we line up, whether he sticks to the 4 or he goes to the 3 to match to what Lincoln have got, which I think he's going to choose the latter rather than choose the first part of that.
Well, if that does mean that you're maybe less optimistic, because if he does go for that one rather than the former, as you've already mentioned there, if that does make you less optimistic, does that mean that you're going to be giving us a score prediction that's maybe a little bit more on the Lincoln side, Matt?
Well, to be fair, I was very generous last year, and I did say that I feel I said Lincoln were going to win, not by the scoreline.
You did. You did.
So I'm quite honest with predictions. I was doing this for a Reading podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I said Reading would beat Rovers because I was pessimistic about our away chance. And I was ultimately proved right, but in terms of the pitch performance, we're probably a little bit unlucky we didn't get anything. But I look at this, I think usually these games between Rovers and Lincoln are quite tight. There's been, since both have been together in League One, there's been 2 games where there's been a draw, there's been a goal, and then there's just been freakish games. Yes, they can be tight, they can be open. So you do never know what you're going to get. It's going to be a mixed bag. I look at it, I think what Rovers will try to do is they do try to stay in games quite a lot against the better sides, and you have to probably say Lincoln up. If you look at last year, as I mentioned, so close to getting in the playoffs, I think we'll see that rightly or wrongly. So I think it's one of those for me. I can, if I'm being really honest, I could see Rovers getting a draw, but I think there's got to be a better balance in the team. It's more down to us more than anything else. And I do like Lincoln as a side. I think they're very, very strong. I think they've not particularly lost people from last year. I think they've got a better squad depth. They've got better options than maybe that was missing last year. But if I one part of my body's telling me a draw, but if I'm being truthful, I would probably favour a Lincoln win, just on the side of I think that the way we're going to approach the game isn't going to be in keeping with what I think we should do. And I think you'll see Lincoln really bring out their style more than us. And I think that's what's going to ultimately probably cost Rovers in this game. So if I give a prediction, I'd probably say 2-0 Lincoln, I would probably say. But with predictions, I'd probably end up proved wrong. So time will tell.
Well, it's interesting that, because I'm sat here whilst listening to what you're saying. I'm also just sat here thinking, yeah, no, I agree. I think we're in with a good shout. But then again, what scoreline am I going to go with? And first of all, I was thinking, okay, are we going to go to 2-1? Part of me would love for us to get a clean sheet. It just feels like that's probably been the one thing that's just lacking from us this season compared to last, is that kind of solidity at the back in terms of clean sheets. We've conceded early in the last, we've had a bit of a record of doing that recently. And I would just like for us to go ahead and come out the blocks and score quickly again and get ourselves on the front foot like we were doing so much towards the back end of last season. So for that, I am also, funnily enough, going to go for a 2-0 win. I think we're just going to try and shut up shop a little bit more, try and get a nice early goal, keep it going until maybe the 60th, 65th minute. You come at us a little bit more, and then we go ahead and get the second. That's the dream. Whether that happens or whether it's as quite as straightforward as what I just said there, who knows? But that's very much what I am hoping for. And by the sounds of it, Matt thinks that could be a good possibility as well. So fingers crossed. But there we go. For those of you who are going down on Saturday, obviously it's a long old journey, but enjoy. I hope you have a great Saturday away in Bristol. As good of a Saturday in Bristol could be, I guess. Matt, thank you so much for joining me and for chatting about Rovers as always. And make sure everybody to go and check Matt's socials out. Like I say, he's on so many different sort of broadcasting channels when it comes to EFL football at the moment, and he does fantastic stuff. You will have undoubtedly heard his voice on some of the highlights packages at some point as well. So yeah, make sure to go and check Matt out. But yeah, until next time, up the imps.